Hello indie game fans, the shoot 'em up is a classic genre which had its heyday when arcades were hot, but I've seen somewhat of a decline in the mainstream in recent years. But fear not, indie developers continue to fill the gap, where I'll be covering upcoming shoot 'em ups that are horizontal, vertical, and everything in between in this video. Let's begin with Oddinary Highway, a pixel art horizontal shooter with roguelite elements that looks pretty decent. It has a retro-futuristic setting where you play as a university student who has to defeat the robot mafia, which of course includes blowing up a whole bunch of enemies. The roguelite shoot 'em up has been attempted before with games like Ardein, but somehow has not managed to stick around, possibly due to how roguelite procedural generation has been implemented in the examples so far, so this game has another crack at the problem and I'm wishing them all the best. One title that caught my attention during the Steam Next Festival but did not have time to cover is The Lord of the Parties, a shoot 'em up fantasy RPG in quite a literal sense. As can be seen, you are gathering a party of heroes as they battle onwards, unleashing their attacks as projectiles in a vertical shoot 'em up. It does remind me quite a bit of Nimble Quest, only that this game is not a game like Snake, but more of a traditional game in this genre. There is a party management system, as seen in the overworld map, where characters can choose not to go into the dungeon if they are in poor condition, with a leveling and XP system, side missions from villagers in town, an equipment crafting system and more. Also, there are auto chess-like elements where gathering 3 or more of a unit will cause them to fuse into a higher rank version, looking like a neat entry in the space. A decent-looking, twin-stick, side-scrolling shoot 'em up with a light horror theme is NeverAwake, set in a never-ending nightmare where our heroine has to fight off these monsters. The 3D models and enemy designs are pretty good, nothing mind-blowing but suitably unnatural, which fits in very well with the nightmare setting. Apparently, there will be multiple endings based on, quote, the player's dedication, but I have no idea what that means. One reason may be that it comes to us from a Japanese developer, so some things might be lost in translation, but a pretty decent looking game nonetheless. For something that's more of a throwback, Megacopter Blades of the Goddess will be familiar to 90s kids, since I swear there were a ton of such games that I encountered on DOS and PC that look exactly like this from an isometric perspective, where the developer brings up examples including Choplifter, Desert Strike and more. It's a little different from your horizontal and vertical shoot 'em ups, but I still think it qualifies, where you control a helicopter that has to destroy its enemies. Oh, And did I mention that this helicopter is sentient? Yes, indeed, this is a living weapon that sustains itself off the blood of its enemies, sacrificing them to the gods to unlock Aztec abilities, which is a clever play on words.
Meet Squadron 51. A rebel alliance formed by highly skilled pilots that are willing to give their lives to save the Earth from the hands of dreadful imperialist aliens. Flying saucers have invaded our planet. The whole world is under attack.
I'll admit, I was not super impressed with Squadron 51 from the get-go, but after spending more time looking at the trailers, I've turned the page and I'm looking forward to this. Of course, the visuals and presentation is what stands out, being in black and white, and having a similar look and animation to sci-fi movies from the 50s. The example that I'm thinking of is Godzilla, where human beings in suits romped around miniature cityscapes, where the planes and UFOs here look as if they were connected to a stick and waved about, which gives it a lot of personality. Other than that, there are fantastically done FMV sequences, but quite a bog standard story of fighting off an alien invasion, but kudos to the team for coming up with this idea. Quick teaser for Ardein.Fall, a game which I was looking forward to and is still slated for 2021. But this developer has been pretty quiet, so we'll just have to wait for more news. Among the games on this list, Cygni, All Guns Blazing is perhaps the best example of most graphics in that it is a very polished looking modern 3D title, but my apologies to the developer, pure graphical fidelity does not necessarily make a game stand out if it looks a little generic. That being said, I'm not trying to be a wet blanket, but rather, some of the levels and the way that it plays with the top-down camera is pretty impressive, with some great looking bullet hell action as well. You play as humans fighting off a powerful biomechanical alien race, facing off against these creatures in deadly battles in the skies. I'm particularly intrigued by the stinger at the end of this trailer and will be looking forward to the boss fights. A simple looking but clever idea of a game is the roguelite shoot 'em up Anti-Paint, one where you play as a painter slinging paint at enemies, but the hook is that every level that you beat results in a unique painting that can only be made by you. As such, being both a game and an experimental art creator is fascinating, making me very interested in this. Some of you who have been subscribers to the channel for a while will be familiar with Windrunners, a title that often shows up on my list of gorgeous upcoming pixel art indie games, but if you're new, let me give you the rundown. This is a side-scrolling aerial combat title, much like Love Rousers or Jet Lancer, where expert control of the thrust and even cutting the engines out will be rewarded as you outmaneuver your enemies. Me being me, of course I love the look of this game, with the use of reflections and explosions being particularly impressive to me. You play as rebel pilots fighting against an empire, trying to liberate those who are oppressed, which is quite a typical setup for a sci-fi world. Most interestingly, you have to fight giant metallic monsters known as the Torments, who act as the boss fights, where I'm interested in the structure of this game. While the Steam store page puts an early 2021 release window, it appears this developer had to take on contract work for Netflix, which has just been completed, so hopefully they will go back to working on this. I was both pretty impressed and in disbelief when I found out that the sequel to the heavy metal run-and-gun action platformer Valfaris was a horizontal shoot-'em-up subtitled Mecha-Theria, where the story of our protagonist continues as a direct sequel to the game from 2019. A little disappointed as well, since the trailer of this game does not kick off as insanely as that of the previous title, where I expected a lot more heavy metal in this. However, it's an interesting change of genres, and given the pedigree of this developer, I do have confidence in them taking the #1 spot. For more shooters, watch these videos and I will see you after the jump.